Welcome to Fostering Parenthood. This is a space to hear from other foster parents firsthand about how to support your foster youth with their healthy sexual development. I'm Dorothy Daniels, and I've been a mom and a foster mom for over 42 years. Hi, Theresa.
Hi,
It's wonderful.
Dorothy.
I am
So good to see
so glad
you.
you are on this podcast. I have to tell you that when I was kind of new at coming into the whole child welfare support piece as opposed to just being a caregiver, you were my mentor. You were I don't think I've ever shared that with you, but the knowledge and the passion that you have to support caregivers, that very few understand how hard this work is and how much we need more and more people like you who bring lived experience in to your teaching. I know you're the coordinator for Pasadena City College with the Foster Care Kinship Education Program. Actually, it's Foster Kinship
Kinship care.
Care
Yes.
Education,
Alphabet soup.
FKCE.
Yes.
So that's wow. See, there you go. I need even more of your mentorship so I can get my letters straight. Um, I just couldn't be more grateful that you're here. And one of the things that really helped me in the beginning, especially working with kids with trauma, is the book you wrote. It's not trauma. It's not drama, which, man, I don't know how many caregivers don't walk around and go, oh my gosh, they're so dramatic. I mean, everything is so intense, but that it's trauma. And until I took your 16-week trauma program, um, I didn't understand that. And could you share with me why you wrote the book? Um, and just maybe some really great tools that you put in the book that I know you shared with me, but I would love to share with others.
Oh, wow. So, first of all, thank you, Dorothy. No, you hadn't shared that with me, and that really touches my heart. And as a teacher, you're wondering, are you making the impact and facilitating? Is it making a difference? So, thank you for sharing that with me. So, it just inspires me to continue to do what I'm doing. And so, and also with the book, right?
Mhm.
Looking at, okay, so what is the need? Why is this here? And so, my writing, it started as part of my healing process to respond to my situations being in foster care. And so going into foster care at 13, I was a kid that was fine, right? No, wasn't doing therapy. I wasn't throwing chairs and smearing and some of the extreme behaviors that I hear caregivers talk about. But I was still being affected by trauma. And it wasn't until years later into adulthood and I started learning about trauma and sitting. The first thing is I sat through a class on really trauma and understanding it, and realized the little girl in the story was telling my story and what I experienced and had never put a voice to, and the adults didn't know to check for
My
just
husband just walked in and handed me a Diet Coke. You rock. You just helped my trauma.
awesome.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Awesome. um,
Back to that little girl.
Yeah, and so not knowing, the adults in my life didn't know to look for trauma. That wasn't something that was talked about. And so part of my healing process later is I began to write pieces of my story to help make sense of it and what was showing up for me in adulthood in my interpersonal relationships. And so because I've been training for FKCE even long before I got to Pasadena. I've been in Pasadena 16 years.
Well,
But
it's
I
okay.
worked
Let's
I
just forget
started
a decade. I'm good with
right.
taking that decade off with for me too.
But yeah, my path started at Rio Hondo College and
Mm,
working with their programs. So it's been over 20 years. And as I've come to work with caregivers, and I also work with students. So I also am our guardian scholars contact for our students here. And so seeing my brothers and sisters and their experiences and trying to marry the relationships between the youth and the caregivers and the things that they're seeing. So taking my story to help me process and make sense of it and using it as a tool and examples for caregivers, or these are the kinds of things that you may see, experience day to day in your home, that we were like, "Oh, that's just them. Oh, it's just," when it's not just anything. Our children are being horrifically impacted by the trauma they're experiencing long before they get to your home. And it's not bad behaviors. It's not them being intentional. They're processing things that they don't even know they're processing. And so it's the book was a tool for caregivers to understand, to get some understanding. You can't fully put yourself in someone's place, but to enlighten what is trauma? How is it showing up? And not to glorify, because some of the books I used to see on foster care was glorifying the abuse. And I was like, oh, that's horrific. We don't need that. People are reading books because they want to know, well, what am I supposed to do? And when you get an understanding of what it is that you're seeing, when a child refuses to go to bed or the child is yelling and matching you, now engaging in a power struggle, there's no winning in a power struggle. And so, how can you help that child to feel safe? Yes, they're physically in four walls, but are they emotionally, psychologically safe? And that really is what the book was taking a look at. Our children are not being defiant because they have nothing else to do and are just trying to see how they can make their day more hellish. But the book was to be a tool. And so then we coupled that with a course for caregivers to become trauma specialists, to dive deeper into what is it you've been seeing on a day-to-day basis? It's not you, don't take it personal, but to see how our children are being affected by the things they've been experiencing. And if we don't come along with some new ways of engaging our youth who've experienced lots of negative situations, then we're not going to see the same outcomes. And it's going to start taking a toll on you as a caregiver. You're going to lose your passion. You're going to be traumatized, re traumatized, experience vicarious trauma if we don't begin to look through a trauma lens. And so that was the book, to help create a trauma lens to see, oh, we are all affected by trauma in so many different ways.
And don't you think the key to a lot of the work that we do is just recognizing what this looks like, what foster care looks like, what foster children look like? And I know one of the things that you helped me with so tremendously was recognizing that when my kids are behaving a certain way, that I wasn't trying to put that in some sort of label like, okay, well, that's a behavior. How do I need to discipline that behavior? And that resource that you have provided through your book has really helped me to look at all of my kids differently. I no longer use the term drama queen, except for myself. but but I give my kids that pass, right? Because I need to look past the label of drama queen. And the vicarious trauma is so important. And I know that's your second book, because we oftentimes are traumatized, right? And we have to recognize within ourselves that maybe we're not acting like we did prior. Maybe we need a little more sleep. I don't like the term self care. In fact, when social workers or anyone else says, well, what are you doing for self care? I go, I don't know. What are you doing for self care? Try to have 6 kids in your home and then go light a candle. Good luck, right? But it did help me to recognize that I need to watch myself too, right? I need to not be the drama queen. I need to stay regulated. So thank you so much for
That is
just
so funny. Well, and so the key in finding words, and thank you because you assisted with that, kind of looking at this whole idea of regulation. Everyone wants to fix the kids,
Mm,
but it's the impact of the adults that are causing the
yeah,
behaviors you see in kids. Not necessarily, I'm saying I'm not blaming caregivers, but
of course not.
when we don't understand and we're not aware of even how it's affecting us,
Mhm,
because sometimes a child's behaviors can re-trigger something in you.
mhm,
Maybe a child has been sexually exposed, mistreated, and you had in your past, and so you just didn't talk about it and felt like it went away because you didn't talk about it anymore.
right.
And so that's not healthy relationships. So now you don't know how to have healthy relationships. And when this child presents, it brings things back up for you that you thought were buried. They're buried, but they weren't. It wasn't solved. It
Trying
didn't
to
dissolve. It didn't. Yeah.
Right. Well, I always think that trying to regulate a child with a dysregulated adult is like pouring gasoline on a fire,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
We're just making it worse. So the most
Absolutely.
important thing we can do, and I think when we talk about regulating ourselves so that we can do the best job that we can as caregivers, we have to look for resources,
Mm.
right? And one of the things that I would love if you could share is FKCE. What resource, what is that, and how can caregivers use that to just be the best that they can be?
Absolutely. And thank you for acknowledging that. So, fostering kinship care education, now that we got that alphabet soup right out.
Yeah, yeah, I could screw it up again if you want, but,
No, I'll take my time giving a little more detail. But so FKCE. And so it's throughout the state. I forgot how many colleges, I want to say it's like 50 something colleges throughout the state of California that provide the program. And so unfortunately, it's something that came out of a lawsuit years ago when a young person was like, I was in foster care. I was not adequately prepared. My foster parents didn't do a good job preparing me to live on my own. And so then it was mandated for caregivers to receive training. And so it comes through the community colleges. So it's programs on the college campus. It's not grant. We're not going anywhere. And so the whole purpose of the programs are to provide support to caregivers to meet the educational and developmental needs of children in their home. And that will look a little bit different at each college in terms of our focus, our passions, access, resource, and the needs of the families. However, it is an excellent resource. If you think of just the resource word, the go to, I tell my caregivers, aside from us doing classes and workshops, if you have a question, ask me. I'm not saying I know everything and I have all the answers, but if you feel like you know where to go to ask a question, that's half the battle. Because if you ever been in a situation like, I don't even know where to start, who to talk to, what to do, that's stressful and overwhelming. You're like, well, I'm just gonna. For me, when I get overwhelmed, I just want to go to sleep. I'm gonna sleep, and maybe it'd be, imagine wanting to be all fixed when I wake up. Well, it doesn't work that way. So the FKC programs are a go-to. We offer lots of trainings. Yes, the mandated trainings, and then there's specialized trainings. Depends on the needs of the families. Again, the expertise of who's in the seat. We actually been having conversation like, okay, so maybe the schools will start looking at, well, certain schools have certain kinds of specializations, and so start maximizing that so that that is a go-to for our caregivers, and being on the college campus, having access to other kinds of community resources. So we do the trainings. We also partner our families with other kinds of resources. So one has been FERS, the Family Urgent Response System. So connecting caregivers to, while my hours are typically 9 to 5, when I say call me, FERS is available 24/7 as a contact to call in a crisis situation. Not necessarily emergency, we can get there, but sometimes a crisis situation when you're pulling your hair out, you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say. It's available for caregivers and the youth, but it is a great resource available throughout the state. Sometimes just to have a voice to be like, and they're like, okay, let's translate that. What is the exact need? So that is definitely a resource. And so we've been definitely connecting with FERS. That's just so many. I got more for you.
I'm a huge supporter of FERS. Fostering Unity is actually a partner with our FERS LA County folks. They handle situations within your home as caregivers, big or small. It can just be simply a quick call to say, "Am I doing this right?" or "What are your suggestions to, something that's leading more into a crisis that doesn't require 911?" But I think, and am I right here, that FERS is in place. It's a state program, as you said, but it's in place to try to keep our children's placement stable without the need for, an ambulance to show up, the police come in code 3, so that kiddos and caregivers don't feel kind of that intrusiveness that was our only option before. So by simply calling that phone number, I believe the response time for FERS is an hour. And
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
compared to
It
some
is
of the other resources that I've tried to call where, they, weren't quite as responsive, um, it's a great resource.
You actually bring up an excellent point too with FERS, and yes, that is the intent. Allowing families to do what families do. You have challenges, you talk it out, but sometimes you might need an intermediary. And an intermediary is not a 911, not a police officer. And then that just increases our youth connection with juvenile justice. And for something that because we didn't know what else to do. So that was our go-to. So FERS is becoming that go-to. And yes, in your home, you don't have to get in your car, go somewhere, fill out a bunch of paperwork, and then if there is a need for someone to come out, I believe that response time is like 3 hours also. So if it is determined that, you do need someone to physically come, not law enforcement, but a mental health provider, then there's also a quick turnaround. And coupled with that, and I love that you're partnering, and so with fostering unity. So while you have the crisis, I love that fostering unity is providing that ongoing mentorship because you have sometimes like with asthma, sometimes you have short term needs and you have long term stabilization, and so having those partners, the give me the correct term. So having the parent partners, the service providers or partners to be mentors to other caregivers, that's that ongoing relationship building. And so then you have less crisis kinds of situations.
Absolutely, because isn't really, what we're trying to do with resources is prevention.
Yes.
We're always such a reactive society, right? We wait until some huge thing happens and then everybody just jumps in and tries to put the fire out. And isn't what we're trying to do with education and resources and support to keep that fire from even igniting, to keep people at bay, at peace?
It is, and I am a huge proponent of prevention and early intervention. People, how do I de-escalate? Well, let's talk about how do we make that connection on the front end. So that's what trauma informed is really being about, right? People use this term, but it's about what is our initial approach and how do we set that stage at the initial approach? And then that minimizes disruptions, crisis kinds of situations. And so when there is a crisis situation, though, something that is new that I want to make sure I share, the Department of Mental Health, at least in LA County, now has a foster care unit. A unit
Wonderful.
specifically, I know, right? I was at a conference and I was like, oh, this brochure says 2021, so this is still new. And a lot of folks don't know. So even when you're calling into DMH specifically to intervene when there's a foster care case, there is a whole separate unit to
Wow.
support our resource families.
Wow. Now, how do we access that?
It's the same number you would call for DMH, yeah, let me not memorize the number. So same number you would call, calling into DMH, but now, when you call in indicating that you are foster care, they should be deferring you to the specialized foster care unit to support mental health. So we've talked about, the PRMT and all these other kinds of the pet teams and so forth.
Mhm.
So rather than go there, they will connect you to the local, DMH specifically geared toward foster families.
Wow, and in that,
Mhm.
I would think that they would be so much more sensitive, right, to kind of
Yes.
our unique needs as opposed to just a phone call that says, "I'm losing it," or "I need help," but very specific to what caregivers and children in out of home care are experiencing. Wow, that's
Yeah, and it's
great.
important for providers to know that there is a distinction and to
Absolutely.
to to be super informed and sensitive and aware and in your approach. And knowing that the goal is stabilization and keeping families whole, keeping families together, keeping our children from the repeated traumas of moving and going to place. And so that's just another aspect for keeping educating caregivers, informing caregivers, but also helping the youth to really start to build a sense of home.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I know is relatively new, is a requirement out of the state of California that caregivers need to take 8 hours of healthy sexual development Do you know where they can access that resource?
Well, let's see, Dorothy, as a matter of fact, I do know.
I happen to know too because I teach
Yeah,
it.
so through the FKCE programs, and so you all wanna check in, and so, it's hard where I know they wanna, "Oh, it's required, it's mandated." I mean, there's so much stuff that you need to know, but it is a requirement, and so through the FKCE programs, you just we're fortunate we've been able to centralize schedules now, and so, to be able to check with and you can check with your local school, but we're still doing lots of distance education. But to really take the course, and it's not, yeah, I know about the birds and the bees. It's really not about that. And it's about really understanding from a youth perspective. So, because it is reproductive health education. It's not sex ed. So let's not call it that. But it is, our children have been so vulnerable, so victimized when it comes to their personal and reproductive health rights. And so when you have a child that is exhibiting sexualized behaviors, it's not them being dramatic. They are reliving what their experiences have been. They have been violated. And so this is an opportunity to get some understanding of that backdrop. And so then how to direct and to have healthy relationships. So model healthy relationships. And we still have, parents who are a little shy about talking about sex ed and birth control. And that is one aspect. And Planned Parenthood is still a resource, but also working with your child's pediatrician and having conversations and getting comfortable. And I've taught the class, and so we talk about where the child has the right to request birth control and have conversations. And caregivers like, no, they shouldn't. There's too many rights. And so I gave the example. Imagine a child going to the doctor, and the doctor wants to know if the child has been sexually abused, but the child can't answer because their perpetrator is sitting in the room with them. How is that child supposed to get help and support? So it silenced some of the, so I was like, well, how, so I'm loving that we are really looking at from a healthy relationship kind of standpoint and not penalizing and continue to victimize the child, but getting that understanding and then knowing what the laws are so that you don't inadvertently violate the law or re-traumatize the child, and or insist on our way of doing things, which isn't always in the best interest of the child, so
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely.
it is a really important training, and it's and I love and I actually use the strategy, the Dear Man strategy, on trying to how it's a form of therapy, but it's how to have a conversation in a way that you advocate for your needs without alienating someone else. And so our youth have been so accustomed to so many people doing things on their behalf, but not including them. So this course actually really brings that back around.
Oh, I love what you just said. I mean, wow. We all need to remember, right, that we're here to advocate. We're here to lift the kiddos in our home up and not put such barriers around them that they're not even able to make really good choices for themselves. One of the things I love about that 8-hour class too is we talk a lot about media, and social media, how our children can put themselves in an unsafe place, because of this lack of safety, right? This lack of uh, there's a lot of predators out there, and that's covered. And also, one of the things that I think is really important, unless my background is nursing, so I actually did part of my training at a Planned Parenthood, so I was more familiar with a lot of the birth control methods. But as kind of that typical parent caregiver, we don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of different types of birth control, which one's 99%, which one's 71%, which birth control can protect someone from STIs, sexually transmitted infections. Um, and that course actually goes through it, and the difference between a bacterial infection and a viral infection, right? Viral,
Yeah,
right?
and
Go
it
ahead.
even gets into age appropriate contraceptive. Some are better, depends on the age of the person. There's some better suited for that. So condoms is not the only form of contraception and birth control pills. And there's so many changes in the environment. So it's important to be aware of those also, and
Mhm.
to not be afraid. And then knowing
Mhm.
what you don't know
Mhm.
and being okay and knowing that there are folks that are better versed, but it's still important for you as a caregiver to be comfortable when your child comes to you with a question. You need to be comfortable at least starting a conversation. Not,
Mhm.
oh, you're too young, or oh, go ask somebody else, because that's about building the relationships. If
Mhm.
a child, again, back to that emotional, psychologically safe environment, if they don't feel like they can come to you with the question that they're having, or, they shouldn't just be getting this information in school, because the caregivers are mandated and the schools are also mandated to provide the training in middle school and high school for our youth. But you also need to know what they're being given, so they're asking follow-up questions later.
Absolutely. Now, if someone does want to, let's say a caregiver says, wow, I learned a lot from that class or from a particular resource, and I really want to make sure that my child, my youth in my home have access to birth control, access to STI um, testing, um, or I just simply want to put a bowl of condoms that are fresh and not, like ready to fall apart when they need to be used under my sink, right? So kiddos can just access them um, freely. Where would they go to get that?
Well, there's lots of places besides the drugstore, right? And we know Planned Parenthood is a go-to, but a lot of other, most healthcare providers have some section. You again, starting with your child's pediatrician. If they have a good relationship, that's a great place to start. And people don't think pediatrician, you're not making the equation, or they're too young. Don't assume that they're too young. There's always an opportunity to have conversation with our youth. So there are specific healthcare clinics, depending on where you are. But again, you can start with your general practitioner also. Um, there's things that they're doing in the schools. So in terms of or school nurses and having those kinds of conversations. Um, so it's not hidden. It's really not hidden. It's in far more places. And I remember there was a time we used to do life skills classes and we had to get permission to have condoms out and distribute. That's not the case anymore. And so there are, and kind of doing a search in your area, kind of what are maybe reproductive. But again, Planned Parenthood is always a go-to, despite what people think controversial. But it is about education.
Mhm.
And then again, your primary physician or your child's pediatrician is also a place to go to. We don't keep them in the FKCE classes, but when especially everything is virtual.
Well, and
But
a lot,
Dorothy, I want to say
yeah.
mention something that you touched on
Hmm.
about our children and the importance of this information, and that is CSAC, commercial
Hmm.
sexual exploitation. And unfortunately, our children are disproportionately targeted. And so being aware of that, so that's another education piece and resource for caregivers to really understand what that is. And again, that not the child just being dramatic, or they're just so highly sexualized. If that's how they've been surviving, and if you know a child has been victimized, then making sure they're getting the proper medical treatment, and then also the proper mental health treatment, because otherwise you can bring them someplace physically, but if they still have a bond to their captor, then there's also risk factors for the caregiver having a child in their home that is still active. They're either actively recruiting or their perpetrator is looking for them. So these are um, things that you want to be aware of and educate yourself on also.
And it's really hard sometimes, right? We sometimes live in our safe bubble, right? And we I know the first time I heard CSEC, I went, "What? What's a CSEC?" Right? And the more I learned about the victimization of our youth and the disproportionality, right, that foster youth are far more likely to become victims of just that whole life, right? Having a pimp, being sold. Um, we need to educate ourselves. Saving Innocence is a wonderful resource here in LA County. to help the kiddos. There's also a specialized unit, CSEC unit, both at
Yes,
the
and a
sheriff's
court.
department.
There's also
Yes,
CSAC court.
and at the Department of Children and Family Services, there's a
Yes.
unit just for CSEC youth. So if you do have a child, a youth in your home that you feel has been a victim or could become a victim, reach out, right? Reach out to those resources.
And there's always all of our children have the potential. And so that also goes back to helping to build a sense of belonging
Hmm.
and keeping our children involved and empowered. So depending on the age of the child. So when you get into things like when a child gets over the age of 16, over the age of 18, for caregivers to know what are services available that they should know about and the child should know about. So, like the AB 12. So, for our children who are over the age of 18, making sure they're connected so they can keep their case open till the age of 21. And the ILP, More Alphabet Soup, the Independent Living Program, so that they're connected with their transition coordinator to access resources. And then it also gives them connected to things like the teen clubs and other youth. The college campuses, the colleges have these our guardian scholars type programs. And so part of my hat at the college, I do the foster parent piece, but I'm also the our guardian scholars, we call the stars. I'm the advisor and coordinator for that. And so connecting students, youth, so they have a sense of belonging. Other resources at the K-12s, finding out caregivers. I hope you all taking notes. Finding out who your foster care liaison is for your district and what services they're providing directly to your youth. Um, just FYI, for this coming year in LA County, there's at least 9 of our schools that will we're getting some funding to do some very intensive case management and connecting our youth to this concept of higher ed. So we have the training on turning dreams to degrees for caregivers to get familiar, but sometimes it's the people you need to know, right? And so knowing
Absolutely.
who's out there and knowing who is talking with your children, that's important too. So I got so much, so
I
much.
know you're just this like little shining star of resources. This is awesome.
And don't sleep on your CASAs. So I learned something this year about a CASA, a court appointed special advocate. I learned 2 things. Because CASAs are appointed by the court, they're volunteer, they're not paid by anyone, they are assigned by the judge. They have the judge's ear where a lot of us don't. And so they can
Mhm.
go and ask things from the judge. So if your child has a CASA, make sure to find out if they like apples or brownies and keep them supplied. But I also found that then anyone can request a CASA.
They
The youth can
can.
request their own CASA. The caregivers, because I thought it was just some extreme situations the court was appointing him, but a CASA can be requested from anyone, and they are wonderful. We're talking lifelong relationships. I have students that have come to enrolled at Pasadena, and they bring their CASA with them, not their social worker, not their parent, their caregiver. They've brought their CASA, and so
When
they've had
when I
these
first
lifelong relationships.
when I first heard casa, I used to think, "They bring a house?" I mean, that's just weird. Who would name a program house? But I realized, right, that they and this is kind of funny, but that term, right, home, they really do just completely wrap around your child, and it's not like the rap team, it's not like those other folks. This is like, a mentor on steroids. I mean, they are dedicated folks, volunteers, usually professionals, who themselves their heart around our kids, and then they have, as you said, the ear of the judge. So, what better way to get your message as a caregiver through to the judge than to work with the casa? And I'm 100% man, chocolate chip cookies, whatever it is, to really bring them into your home. So that's a great resource. Thank you.
I have another partner that is a similar kind of resource, but one of the things called Simply Friends, and
Mm,
so we've been working with them, and so they train similar kinds of volunteers to be ed rights holders.
mm.
And if you a person who is an ed rights holder, so I want you all to hear this. So with Simply Friends, they have a retired judge, so it helps to get ed rights holders cleared and connected much faster. And there is a limitation with the CASA. A CASA cannot really expose our youth to other people and other things, but an ed rights holder can transport can be a mentor, can get a child to access some things that others can't. So I've been working with Simply Friends. We actually did a barbecue to bring to match the some potential ed rights holders or co-ed rights holders for caregivers
There you
or an
go.
IEP specialist. So depending on what your need is. And so and the thing about Simply Friends that I really like is they do these social events to bring neighbors together and then let the families pick and let the children decide who they have made a connection with to be that
Wow.
partner.
And
And
how do
so
they reach out to those folks?
Simply Friends, they're still relatively new. They do have a very primitive website. So you can do a search for Simply Friends because they're
Okay.
also part of the LA Youth Network that does a lot of work and it started around CSAC, right?
Oh,
But we can do a search for Simply Friends because I actually don't have a phone number on me. So
that's
sorry
okay.
about that.
We have a
But
website that folks can go to, and it's in our intro and outro for the
okay.
podcast, so they can hear that and go to that page for all these resources.
Yeah, we'll make sure we add all of that.
Mhm.
And then even within the Department of Children and Family Services, as much as there seems to be these schisms and things, the RFSP, Resource Family Support Program, the liaisons have been wonderful
RFS.
go-tos, the
Mhm.
RFSP liaisons. More neutral while they work for the Department of Children and Family Services, they're not case carrying social workers. And they do have a centralized email, and then there's 8 of them. So they're throughout LA County. And they've done workshops for us, but they've been a go to. And I have been a trusted resource. Anyone who's hung around me knows that if I'm going to give you a resource, I want it to be valid. That's the last thing is, oh, well, no, go here, go here, go here. And then I also tell my caregivers if I refer you to someone and it doesn't work out the way I shared with you that it's supposed to be, please let me know because things happen. Things happen. So the RFSP liaisons have been wonderful. Again, very neutral. They can check on some things that because they're part of the Department of Children and Family Services
They speak that
that
language.
others. Yes, yes. And then two legal resources. We always have the Lines for Children's Rights, and they have divisions within the department. So they have education, they have other I know we do a lot with the education, but they have a couple of other divisions within for those who are looking for adoption assistance. So they're pro bono attorneys that will work with the caregiver, and it's always about the child though. But sometimes you need that representation and that voice. So Alliance for Children's Rights is a go-to. And then I've been working with Advo Kids,
Love advocates.
ADVO Kids. And so they have attorneys also, but they'll do sometimes you can do like a drop in, not necessarily an intake, but a drop in kind of conference and get information. So that is another legal resource that I've found super helpful and useful for our families. Because sometimes you might need to just call in the law a little bit, call on the law and the policies, and someone who is versed to just kind of remind folks. But I just want
Absolutely.
caregivers to know that you're not alone. So you just kind of, yeah, I know it's a lot to take in.
It
It
is a lot, but
is.
gosh, if we don't have the resources, then we just can't do the job we need. And oftentimes I try to remember to share with caregivers that when you find these resources that work, especially things like FERS, PMRT, MAT, all of these things that you kind of hear us with these alphabet soup, write them down and put them next to your phone. Resources don't do you any good in the moment if you
If you
can't
can't find
access
it,
them
right.
in the moment. And I can't tell you how many caregivers call me on the care line. And the care line just is also a resource. It's a phone number where caregivers, not in a crisis, right? Not an emergency, but if you are like kind of ready to jump off that cliff, you're ready to 14-day a child and disrupt a placement, which we know causes more trauma. And you just need to talk to somebody that understands the walk you're going through right then.
Yes.
The care line is answered by a social, or I'm sorry, by a social worker. It's answered by a caregiver. So these are veteran caregivers who literally carry a cell phone. Oops, that's my pictures on this slide. We'll do this. Um, so, but they carry this phone just for you. And that phone number is 213-269-0000. And that is a phone number that can be used also. Theresa, this has been just the most amazing time to talk about the things that we often don't get to have time to talk about, right? Because it's not pretty, right? It's not like really popular and political. This is what we need though to be successful. Is there any tools as we close out that you can share with our caregivers as they look for resources, as they try to do the best job they can?
I want to start off my piece with saying thank you to caregivers. And
Mm.
in my class, my hats off, big heart goes out for caregivers choosing to take on this journey to take care of child, to take on a child that they didn't birth and does not come with an instruction manual. And so, couple of tools. So Dorothy took my first one, and so that is really putting things in writing, right? Keep it handy, remembering who you talk to, and names. I get caregivers. Oh, it's from this department. It's this person. Or I'm like, okay, no, take a moment. Oh, it takes a lot of time to write this stuff down. Yeah, but when you write it down once and put it in a place that you can keep up with it, then it's there. You don't have to keep searching over and over. So yes, finding a place that is your go-to. Some of us are still old fashioned and like, paper and notebooks to write stuff down. If you have, use your phone for notes. You can store things in there or specific tabs. But yes, the things that you may need, put them in one place because in the moment when you're a little frantic, you're gonna wait. What's the number to 911?
Okay, is
That's
that a
not a good place to
challenge?
be in. Oh, and just a quick resource: 988 is live today.
Stop it. What?
988, and so it is replacing 911 for mental health supports.
What? Go,
Yes,
girl.
so
I
when
didn't know
there's a
that.
mental health crisis, we didn't even talk
90.
about that, but when there's a mental health crisis, you would go to 988 instead of 911, so then you're getting mental health providers to step in, when there's emergency and crisis situation, and then the governor's passed a budget to put a lot more money into really amping that up to really provide the resources. A lot of times folks are losing their lives when it's a mental health crisis, but they're sending out the SWAT team. Won't charge you all for that. That's 988. So again, keeping those things. My two other tools and recommendations is ask questions before. I actually do a workshop on questions to ask before you accept a placement. You all empower yourself and know you have a right to ask questions about the child and meet with the child. And if social worker or whoever, or sometimes it's the ER, the technical assistant, but you have a right to ask questions. We're looking at stabilizing our children. So you want your home to be the home for this child. You should be asking questions. You have a right. And if you have someone who's not willing to ask questions, then you can gracefully decline the placement because if you're not getting help on the front end, I'm not sure why you think when you get the child in your home, you're gonna be able to ask for more help later. So ask questions. Um, in the workshop, we spend 3 hours talking about the kinds of stuff you should be asking about and sharing the policy
So making
and
sure it's a good match, right?
absolutely making sure it's a good match. We all should be doing that. And so this idea of 14-day notice, that's another topic, but you're really not doing a 14-day notice. You come to your wits end and activating a process, but we need to eliminate that. And so to help eliminate that, back to that prevention and intervention is on the front end, asking questions and also knowing what are your strengths. I used to hear parents, "Oh, I can work with any child." I was like, "No, you can't. Let's just put that on the table. You can't. Don't deceive yourself or the child, but ask questions, and know what your fit is." And my third tool is empathy, the big E. Um, I have been, and I talk about that in the book, and so I actually want to do a revision. But I saw the most beautiful video from Brené Brown explaining empathy. It was so beautiful, and it's not about asking a whole bunch of questions. Well, why? What's happening with you? No, it's not about that. And it's not about fixing our children and making everything better. But empathy is about being open and acknowledging, Dorothy, thank you for sharing with me. I'm sorry that you've had that experience, but thank you for sharing that with me and trusting me with that. And I know it must be difficult for you to be able to share that. And so it's about being in a place to be open to someone sharing with you their hurts, and not always trying to put band-aids on and be at a place to fix, because there's things we can't fix. But empathy is being open and knowing that in order for me to be open to hear from you, Dorothy, I have to tap into a place of myself that has also had maybe some similar experiences, not diminishing mine or yours, or telling you, oh, yep, I had that exact same experience. This is what you need to do. But no, just being that receptacle for the hard things, and being okay with sometimes that's enough in the moment.
That's enough, right? That's sometimes all we need to do is be that empathic healer that doesn't judge,
Yes.
that doesn't fix.
Yeah.
You just hear them, love them, accept them. And if you need help, I hope you guys all feel that you have some resources now to go to.